I have never stolen a thing in my life. I have never raised my hand to my children in anger. I have never spoken a false word in a court of law, never cheated a neighbor, never taken more than what was owed to me. I have been to church every Sunday for 70 years, except for the 3 Sundays after my youngest was born, and the 2 Sundays when the roads were frozen solid and the horse could not keep his footing. People in this county have called me honest my whole life. Honest Agnes. That is what they called me, Honest Agnes Whitmore. But I told one lie. In the spring of 1871, I was 24 years old, and that lie destroyed my entire family. Not slowly, not in the way that some things erode over years until there is nothing left. Quickly, the way a fire destroys a house, fast and total, and with no way to undo it once it is started. I am 82 years old, and I am going to tell you what I did, because I have told no one, and because the weight of telling no one has become heavier than the weight of telling someone, even a stranger, even now at the end of everything. I was born in June of 1846, Perry County, Ohio, a small town called New Lexington, which was the county seat and which had a population of perhaps 800 people when I was a child, and which felt, to a girl growing up on the farm 2 miles outside it, like a city of considerable importance. My father had a dry goods store on Main Street. He had opened it in 1839, 7 years before I was born, and by the time I came along it was established and moderately prosperous. The kind of establishment that everyone in the county used and no one thought remarkable, which is the best kind of business to have in a small county, because unremarkable means steady. His name was Walter Whitmore. He was a careful man with money and a generous man with everything else. He extended credit to farming families in bad years without being asked to, and he kept his prices fair. And he was known throughout the county as a man whose word was worth more than most men's signatures. I think about that now, his word being worth something, his honesty being the thing people knew him by. And then I think about what his daughter did in the spring of 1871. He charged 7 cents a yard for muslin and 4 cents for plain cotton and 14 cents for the good wool cloth that the farming wives used for winter coats. I know those prices because I spent my childhood in that store, and I heard them spoken so many times they are part of me, the way hymns are part of people who grew up in church. I hear them sometimes when I am fallen asleep. 7 cents. 14. My mother's name was Ruth. She was a quiet woman, not in the way of being timid, but in the way of a person who has decided that words are valuable and should not be spent without purpose. She ran the household and she helped in the store on Saturdays, and she grew a kitchen garden. It was the envy of every woman in the county. Beans and corn and squash and tomatoes and the particular variety of apple mint that she dried every August, and which made the whole house smell of summer well into January. There were 4 of us children. I was the third. Above me were my brothers Franklin and George, born in 1840 and 1843. Below me was my sister Dora, born in 1849, 3 years younger than me. Dora. That is who this is about. That is who it has always been about. I have to tell you about Dora carefully because it would be easy to describe her in a way that makes her sound simple, and she was not simple. She was the least simple person I have ever known. But she was the kind of person who is easy to underestimate if you are looking at them with the wrong kind of eyes, and I had the wrong kind of eyes for most of my life. And that is one of the things I have to account for. Dora was 3 years younger than me, which does not sound like much, but when you are 8 and someone is 5, or 14 and someone is 11, 3 years is a considerable distance. I had always been the older one. I had always been the one who knew more, who understood more, who was trusted with more. That position felt natural to me. They felt like the truth of things, not just an accident of birth order. Dora was not willing to stay in the position I had assigned her. That is not fair. She was not trying to challenge me. She was simply growing into herself, the way people do. And the self she was growing into happened to be one that the people around her noticed and responded to. And I found that difficult, in a way I could not have explained at the time and did not fully understand until much later. She was pretty, prettier than me. That is a plain fact, and I state it plainly. I was not ugly. I was a serviceable-looking woman with good color and adequate features, and the kind of appearance that people describe as handsome when they cannot say beautiful. Dora was beautiful in the way that stopped conversations. Not because she cultivated it. She was not a vain girl. She simply had the kind of face that people looked at twice without knowing they were doing it, and she seemed entirely unaware of this, which somehow made it worse. She was also clever. Not in the way I was clever, which was the careful, methodical kind. The kind that works through problems step by step and arrives at answers that are reliable but not surprising. Dora was clever in the fast, bright way, the kind that sees the whole of a thing before most people have found the beginning of it. She could add a column of numbers in her head. She could hear a piece of music once and reproduce it closely enough to recognize. She read everything she could lay her hands on, and she remembered what she read. My father adored her. He did not love me less. I know that now, and I even knew it then, in the sensible part of my mind. But there is a difference between being loved and being delighted in, and my father was delighted by Dora in a way that he was not quite delighted by me. And I felt that difference every day of my childhood, like a small stone in my shoe, not crippling, but always there. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one he depended on, and that was worth more than being delighted in. At least that is what I used to tell myself. By the time Dora was 18 and I was 21, she had become the kind of young woman that everyone in New Lexington had an opinion about. The women her age admired her. The older women approved of her, which was less common than you would think, because pretty young women are often viewed with suspicion by older ones. The men of the county, young and not so young, found reasons to visit the dry goods store at a rate that my father found amusing and my mother found wearing. I found it something that was neither amusement nor concern, something harder to name, a kind of fixed attention that I did not like in myself and could not seem to stop. And in the autumn of 1868, when Dora was 19, a man named Charles Ael came to New Lexington. He came to take a position as the new school teacher, the old one having left for Columbus in the summer. He was from Lancaster, which was 15 miles west. He was 25 years old. He had dark hair and a lean, attentive quality, and he spoke carefully, choosing his words the way a person chooses tools, with an eye to which one will do the work most cleanly. He came into the store his second week in town to purchase paper and ink for the schoolroom. I was behind the counter. I was 22 years old, and I had been helping in the store since I was 8. And I knew every item in it, and I was good at the work in the way that comes from years of doing something correctly and without complaint. He asked about the paper. He asked a careful question about the quality of it, whether it would hold ink without bleeding through, which was not the kind of question most people asked and which told me something about him. We talked for perhaps 15 minutes, not about anything of consequence, about the paper, and then about the store, and then about New Lexington, which he was still learning. He thanked me when he left. He came back the following week. He came back the week after that. By the end of November, I had come to understand that he was coming back to see me. Not for the paper, for me. He asked questions about what I read. He told me what he was reading. He had opinions that he stated carefully and then revised when I pushed back on them, which was rare in men, and which I found more interesting than I can adequately describe. I had not been found interesting before, not in that specific way, and it opened something in me that I had not known was closed. He was not in love with me yet. I understood that, but he was paying attention to me, and attention from a man like Charles Ael, a man who was careful and intelligent, and who had chosen me specifically to pay attention to, felt like something I had been waiting for without knowing. I was waiting. Dora came into the store on a Saturday in December of 1868. She came in on an errand for my mother, needing calico, and Charles Ael was there. That was all. She came in, she was introduced. They spoke for perhaps 5 minutes, and she went home with the calico. I watched it. I watched his eyes change. It was not dramatic. He did not stop paying attention to me. He was too careful a man for that. But there was a quality of attention that had been mine, and that shifted, slightly and without intention, in the direction of the door through which my sister had just walked. And I felt it the way you feel a temperature change, without seeing the cause, just with the sudden knowledge that something is different now. He kept coming to the store. He kept talking to me. He was perfectly kind. He remained the same person he had been in November, thoughtful and measured, and genuinely interested in what I said. But I watched him. I watched the way his eyes moved when Dora came in. I watched the way he found occasions to ask about her. Small questions slipped into conversations about other things. I watched and I catalogued and I understood. By the spring of 1869, I had accepted that Charles Ael was in love with my sister. I accepted it in the way you accept a diagnosis, not with peace, with the grim recognition that a thing is true whether you want it to be or not. He courted her through 1869 and into 1870. It was proper and gradual, the way courtship was in those years in a county like ours. And my father approved of him because my father was a reasonable man who could see that Charles Ael was steady and intelligent and would be a good provider and a kind husband. My mother approved of him. Dora was happy in a way that I had to look at every day. I was the maid of honor at their wedding in September of 1870. I stood beside my sister at the front of the church in a dress my mother had made, and I held her flowers, and I smiled, and I meant the smile, or I meant enough of it that no one could see the part I did not mean. And afterward at the dinner, I toasted them and said all the right things, and I went home and I sat in my room and I felt something that I am not going to dress up with a gentler name. I felt that I had lost something that should have been mine. That is not fair. I know it is not fair. He never belonged to me. He had been paying attention to me, and then he had fallen in love with my sister. And that is a thing that happens in the world and has nothing to do with right or wrong. He was not taken from me. He simply went where he went. but knowing a thing is unfair does not always prevent you from feeling it. And I felt it. I carried it through the autumn and into the winter of 1870 and into 1871, and I told myself it would pass, and it did not pass. And I kept telling myself it would pass, and then in the late winter of 1871, something happened that gave my resentment a shape and a direction it had not had before. My brother Franklin told me something. Franklin was the oldest of us, 31 that year, a serious, steady man who farmed land east of town and who was not given to gossip or to saying more than he had reason to say. We were not particularly close, Franklin and I, in the way that siblings with a large gap in temperament are often not particularly close, but we trusted each other with the plain facts of things. He told me on a February evening in 1871, when we were both at our parents' house for supper, that he had seen Charles Ael in Lancaster the previous Saturday, that he had seen him on the street near the Lancaster courthouse with a woman who was not Dora, that he did not know who the woman was, that they had been standing close together in the manner of people who know each other well, that when Franklin had lifted his hand in greeting, Charles had seen him and moved away from the woman and come across the street to speak with him, and had seemed, Franklin said, as though he had been caught at something. Franklin told me this because he did not know what to make of it. He was not accusing anyone. He was telling me his sister, a thing that had unsettled him, because I was 3 years younger and 3 years less certain than he was about what it meant, and he wanted another opinion. I sat with it for several days. I told myself I was deciding what to do. I told myself I was thinking about Dora's well-being and what would be best for her to know or not know. I told myself I was being careful. What I was actually doing was deciding whether what I had been handed was something I could use. And on a Sunday afternoon in March of 1871, I told my father. I did not tell him what Franklin had told me. That is the lie. That is the exact shape of it. I did not tell him that Franklin had seen Charles with a woman, and that the encounter had seemed suspicious, and that we did not know what it meant, and that perhaps someone should look into it or speak to Charles directly. I told my father that Charles Ael was keeping a woman in Lancaster. I said it plainly as a fact. I said I had reason to believe it. I said I thought he needed to know. My father looked at me for a long moment across the kitchen table, and he said, "How certain are you?" And I said, "Certain enough." That was the lie, not the words exactly. The certainty that I did not have and pretended to have, and the decision to present a suspicion as a fact to a man who trusted my word, because his whole life he had found my word to be trustworthy. He believed me. My father went to Charles Ael the following day. I do not know exactly what was said between them. I know it was not gentle, because my father was a gentle man who had just been told that his daughter's husband was being unfaithful, and gentleness does not survive that easily. Charles denied it. He denied it completely, and he told my father to speak to Franklin about what Franklin had actually seen, which was two people standing on a street, and my father did speak to Franklin, and Franklin told him what he had actually seen, which was a great deal less than what I had represented it to be. My father came to me. We were alone in the store. It was a Tuesday morning in March, cold still, the stove going in the corner, the smell of the dry goods store that I have known my whole life, cotton and wool and sawdust, and the particular smell of the wooden floors that my father had put in himself in 1844. He said, "Agnes, what did you actually know?" I could have told him the truth at that moment. I could have said, "I am sorry." I went further than what I knew. I was not certain. I should not have said it the way I said it. I did not say that. I said what I believed to be true. He looked at me for a long time. My father, who had built his whole life and his whole reputation on the word of a Whitmore, meaning something. He looked at me and I watched him understand something that I do not think he wanted to understand. He said, "You believed it or you knew it." I said, "I believed it." He walked out of the store and he did not speak to me again that day. Charles told Dora what had happened. He told her everything, what my father had said, what I had said, what Franklin had actually seen, all of it. Dora came to the house that evening. We stood in the kitchen. It was just the two of us. She looked at me in a way that I had never seen her look at anything, a way that was not anger exactly, but was something past anger, something that has the temperature of anger but is colder and more permanent. She said, "Why?" One word. She knew already. She did not need me to explain the mechanics of the lie. She wanted to know why I had done it, and I could not answer her. Not because I did not know, but because knowing it and saying it to her face were different things entirely, and I was not, in that moment or in any moment in my life, capable of the second one. She left. She and Charles left New Lexington entirely. He lost his position at the school. My father's accusation, even walked back as it was, had the quality of smoke in a small county. People had heard something had happened, something with the school teacher, something about a woman, and the specifics blurred quickly. But the smoke stayed. Charles found a position in Muskingum County, 40 miles east, and they went there in the April of 1871, and they did not come back. 10 years passed. My father spoke to me, but not the way he had before. He was not cruel. He was not cold. He was careful, which was worse in some ways because the care was new. He had not been careful with me before because he had not needed to be. You are only careful with people you cannot fully trust. My mother knew something had happened, but not the whole of it, and she navigated the space between my father and me with the quiet, exhausted diplomacy of a woman who had spent her whole life managing the weather of people she loved. She never asked me directly. I never told her directly. George, my other brother, knew enough to know I had done something and not enough to know exactly what. And he was the kind of man who did not ask questions. He was not sure he wanted answered. Franklin knew more than anyone except me and my father. He knew that what he had seen had been made into something. It was not, and he knew by whom. He never said so to me. He was polite. He was the same Franklin he had always been, steady and spare with words, and the steadiness was unchanged, and the words were sparser, and I understood what that meant. I got letters from Dora for the first 2 years. Short letters. Factual. The kind of letter a person writes to maintain a form of contact while withholding the substance of themselves. She had a child in 1872, a girl named Clara. She told me so in a letter of 4 sentences. I wrote back. I asked about Clara. The letters continued, short and factual, until 1876, when they stopped. 15 years went by without a letter, then 20. I married a man named Harold Voss in 1874. He was a farmer north of town, a decent and unremarkable man who needed a practical wife and who found one. We had 3 children. I was practical. I kept the house and raised the children and put up 17 quarts of tomatoes every August. and I did not tell Harold about the spring of 1871. I did not tell anyone. My father died in 1889. He was 73 years old. He died in the bedroom of the house he had lived in for 50 years, in the bed he had shared with my mother for 47 of those years, and I was there, and my brothers were there, and my mother was there, and Dora was not there because we had not been able to reach her in time. She came 4 days after. She and Charles and their 3 children came to New Lexington 4 days after my father was in the ground. I watched her walk into the house. I had not seen her in 18 years. She was 40 years old. She had the particular quality of a woman who has built a life on her own terms, a settledness, a lack of the anxious self-watching that I had never been able to put down. She stood in the front room of our parents' house, and she looked at me across it, not the way she had looked at me in the kitchen in 1871, not with that cold clarity, was something I could not quite read. Tiredness, perhaps, the kind of tiredness that comes from having carried something for 18 years. We did not speak about it. We spoke about our father. We spoke about the house and what would be done with it and what our mother would need. We spoke about her children and mine, who were near each other in age and who met for the first time in the yard and found each other interesting in the way children find each other interesting when they have been told they are cousins and have never met. She stayed 4 days. She left. I watched the wagon go down the road until I could not see it any more. 7 years later, in 1896, Dora died. I was in my kitchen when my mother sent word. I was making bread. My hands were in the dough. The girl who brought the note was 12 years old, a neighbor's daughter, and she handed me the folded paper and waited while I read it. And I stood there with flour on my hands, and I read my mother's handwriting telling me that Dora had taken ill with fever in September, and that Charles had written to say she was gone. September. It was October when I read it. She had been gone for 3 weeks before the word reached me. 3 weeks I had been making bread and putting up the last of the garden and going about my days while my sister was already in the ground. I set the note on the table. I put my hands back in the dough. I worked the dough for a long time without thinking anything clearly, just working it, pressing and folding the way my mother had taught me, because the body needs something to do when the mind cannot manage itself. Dora was 50 years old. I am going to tell you the exact shape of what I wasted. I am going to tell it plainly, because the plainness is the only honest way. 25 years. From the spring of 1871 to October of 1896. 25 years is what I had after I told that lie, and in 25 years I did not once find the words to say to my sister what needed to be said. I did not write a letter that said, "Dora, what I told Father was not what I knew. It was what I wanted to be true, and I am sorry. And the reason I did it was something I am ashamed of and cannot fully explain except to say that I was 24 years old, and I had wanted something that went to you instead, and I was not big enough to accept that gracefully. I never wrote that letter. I could have written it in 1872. I could have written it in 1878 or 1882 or any year in between. I could have written it when she came for our father's funeral, and I had her across a room from me for 4 days, and the chance was real and present and available. 25 years of available chances, and I took none of them, because taking one would have required saying out loud what I had done and why I had done it, and the why I done it, And the why was the part I could not say. The what was bad enough. The why was worse. The why was that I had been in love with her husband before he was her husband, and that the love had not been returned, and that I had used a thin piece of suspicion to try to pull apart a marriage I resented, and I had been willing to use my father's trust in me as the instrument of it. That is the truth. I have never said it out loud before this moment. It sounds worse out loud than it did kept inside. That is always the way with things like this. It was my fault. Nobody else's, just mine. The lie was mine. The pride that kept me from correcting it was mine. The 25 wasted years were mine. After Dora died, I tried to do things differently. My daughter Nell married a man in 8999 that I did not think was good enough for her. He was a farmer's son from 2 counties over, not poor, but not comfortable, not educated past the common school, without the particular kind of solidity I'd hoped she would find. I had opinions about him that were specific and numerous and not entirely unfair. I kept them to myself. I had been wrong about a man once at considerable cost. I was not going to be wrong about a man twice. I held my tongue and I watched and I paid attention and I waited. He has been married to Nell for 22 years. He built her a house with his own hands. He has been sober and faithful and kind to her and to their 4 children in every year of those 22 years. He sat with me last winter when I was ill for 2 weeks and brought wood for the stove every morning without being asked. I was wrong about him. I am glad I kept my opinions to myself. But here's what I want you to understand. Being right that time did not cancel out being wrong the first time. Keeping my mouth shut in 899 did not undo what my mouth did in 1871. That is not how it works. The right things you do after the wrong thing do not replace it. They just exist alongside it. You carry both. I kept a good house. I raised 3 children. I put up the garden every year and I went to church every Sunday. And I was known in this county as Honest Agnes Whitmore my whole life. And none of that is untrue. And none of it touches the spring of 1871. If you are listening to me, I want you to hear this directly. If you have told a lie that hurt someone, go to that person and say so. Say, I told you something that was not true, and I knew it was not fully true when I said it. And I am sorry, and the reason I said it was this, and the reason is not an excuse. And I'm not asking you to forgive me, only to know the truth finally. Say those exact words, or words that mean the same thing. Say them today, not when you are ready. Not when the time feels right. You will never be ready. The time will never feel right. Those are things you tell yourself to make the waiting feel like wisdom when it is only cowardice wearing a quieter name. Say it while they can still hear you. Say it while there is still time for the truth to be in the room between you before one of you leaves the room for good. I had 25 years. 25 years and 3 weeks before Dora was already in the ground when the word reached me. 25 years in which I could have picked up a pen any single morning and written 4 sentences that would have told the truth and asked for nothing. I could not find the courage for 4 sentences in 25 years. Do not be me. Say it now. Today. Say you were wrong. Say you lied. Say it was your fault. Say nobody made you do it. Say you have been carrying it, and you do not want to carry it anymore without the person it belongs to, knowing the shape of it. That is all. It is not complicated. It is only hard. I dream about Dora sometimes. We are young in the dream, girls still, standing in our father's store in the afternoon light that came through the front window and made the dust in the air look like small gold coins floating. She is standing at the counter where I always stood. She is reading something, a paper or a letter, and she looks up when I come in. In the dream, I walk toward her and I try to say it. I try to say, Dora, I lied to Father in March of 1871. I told him something I did not know to be true, and I did it because I was small enough and frightened enough to try to take something from you. And I am sorry, and I have been sorry for 50 years. But in the dream, I cannot reach her. The store is longer than it should be. I walk toward the counter, and it stays the same distance away. She keeps reading. I keep walking. And then I wake up. I wake up in the gray of early morning, and the store is gone, and Dora is gone, and I am an old woman in a bed in Perry County, Ohio. And the lie I told in the spring of 1871 is still in me, the same size it has always been, unchanged by 50 years of carrying it, still the one thing that took my family apart and that I never had the courage to confess to the person it hurt most. That's when I will die carrying the one lie that destroyed my entire family. I have thought about what my father felt when he understood what I had done. He was a man who built his whole life on his word meaning something, and his daughter had used his trust in her word as a weapon. I do not know if he ever fully forgave me. He never said either way. That is the kind of man he was. He received the bad the same way you received the good, with a slow nod and a return to work. But the careful way he spoke to me after March of 1871, that new carefulness where there had been none before, stayed until the day he died. 18 years of careful. I earned it. And Charles. I have thought about Charles Ael every year since 1871, a man who came to a small Ohio town to teach school and who lost his position and his good name in that town because of what I said, who had to uproot his young wife and take her 40 miles away to start again because the smoke of my accusation would not clear, who did nothing deserving of any of it, who was by every account I ever heard a good husband to my sister for the 25 years they had together before she died. He is still living, I am told. He is in his 70s now. He remarried after Dora died. I do not know if he knows that I know what I did. I do not know if Dora ever told him the full shape of it. I could write to him. I have thought about it. He is the only one left who was there, who knew what happened, who deserves to hear me say it plainly. I've thought about writing to him for 15 years. I have not written. That is still cowardice. At 82 years old, I am still finding ways to be the same person who stood in the dry goods store in March of 1871 and chose the easier thing. I am not proud of that, but I am telling you the truth of it because the truth is what I have promised myself to tell. Finally, even if only to the air. The people who suffer most from lies are not always the people the lie was told about. Sometimes they are, but sometimes the worst suffering belongs to the one who told it, who has to carry the knowledge of what they did and who they showed themselves to be in that moment, who has to live inside the fact of it for 50 years, who has to look at themselves in the glass every morning knowing that the honest woman people see when they look at her has a room in her that she has never let anyone into. I am not saying this to make you feel sorry for me. I am saying it because if you are considering a lie right now, a small one, a convenient one that seems like it will fix something that needs fixing, or give you something you want, or protect you from something you fear. I want you to understand what you are actually purchasing. You are purchasing 50 years of a room you cannot let anyone into. You are purchasing the careful eyes of the people who find out. You are purchasing the dream where you walk towards someone and cannot close the distance, and you wake up still carrying it, and you carry it all the way to the end. It is not worth it. Whatever it gives you in the moment, it is not worth it. I kept a good house. I raised 3 children. I was called Honest Agnes Whitmore my whole life. And one spring morning in 1871, when I was 24 years old and small enough and frightened enough to do it, I told one lie to my father about my sister's husband. And that lie broke my family into pieces that were never quite put back together the same way, and I never found the courage to say so to the person who deserved to hear it. And she went into the ground in September of 18996 without knowing that I knew what I had done. That is the truth. All of it. Finally. And the one lie I told in the spring of 1871 is the thing that destroyed my entire family, and I will carry it all the way to the end.